Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, the podcast designed for principals, heads of school, menalim, and anyone else who looks to improve and enhance Jewish education. I am really excited to have here with us today as a guest a former colleague of mine from Cleveland. That's a theme some of you may have noticed, and currently the director of Nelech, a one-semester program at Or Torstone High Schools in Israel for American students in their 10th grade year, supported by the Tzemach David Foundation. And it is the first year that this program is run. I think we have a tremendous amount to learn about the program, the content, and some broad lessons about leadership and what it means to launch something new and what it means to deal with a bunch of 10th graders for a number of months, totally away from their home and their family. So it's our pleasure to welcome to the podcast today, Rabbi Rick Schindelheim, director of this program, Nelech. Thank you, Rick, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So just give us a little bit of background here. First on the program, what is Nelech and how did you come to be involved in it in its launch year this past year?
So I would say it's the brainchild of David Magerman, who is the founder of the Tzemach David Foundation. David's from Philadelphia, and in a lot of ways, his heart is very much in Israel. And he has, for the last number of years, been working hard to try to shift the center of consciousness of especially the modern Orthodox community in America towards Israel. And he's doing a lot of work with older kids, college age. There's an initiative that the foundation has called The Future is Calling, where they're trying to help kids envision themselves in college in Israel and making that happen, exposing them to different opportunities in college in Israel. And so there was a natural kind of progression, kind of younger, to think about, okay, well, how do we get kids to really feel comfortable in Israel before they make that decision about what they're going to do in college? So, we have all these kids from modern Orthodox high schools going to a Shana Ba'aretz, Shana Bet in Israel, and many, many, many of them going back to America to go to college. So how do we get them to think about, before they commit to college in Israel, before they commit to college after high school, mostly in North America, how do we get them to really seriously consider college in Israel and the future in Israel? And so Nelech was born of this idea of, let's get them to feel really comfortable in Israel beforehand and to kind of almost like test drive real life during high school, during 10th grade, before they're making that decision. So our tagline is, learn where you belong. And that's really the idea. First of all, first word is learn. It's not a vacation. It's not a summer program. They're learning. It's school. They're doing school, right? And on a daily basis, they're doing school and they're doing it where they belong. And on a deeper level, they're learning where they belong. They're learning that they belong in Israel. And so it gives students opportunity to feel like, okay, what would it be like if I actually lived here? We had a great line from one of our students. She said, before I came to Nelech, I thought of Israel as a place you go on vacation. And then I started to see that Israel's a place where you can go to school. And then after some of the Shabbatot in the communities that we went to, I really started to feel like Israel's a place that I can live. So it's our way of trying to expose students to this idea that Israel is and really can, in a very real way, be your future. That's our
Amazing
goal.
Okay, so a lofty goal, and I definitely want to talk a little bit more about that. There's also this other layer of, in addition to that goal, you are setting up a program from nothing, right? First year. And how many schools sent kids to Nelech this year? How many different high schools did you have kids from?
We had 25 students, 13 girls and 12 boys. We actually aimed for 24, 12 and 12. And we had a hard time saying no to some of the excellent applicants. And we managed to squeeze in 13 girls. About 12 schools were represented. So really not a lot of students from, each school. So really from all over the country, from the New York, New Jersey area, South Florida, Philadelphia. We had a student from Phoenix, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Toronto, really all over the place. Chicago really had students from a widespread. Yeah.
That's amazing. So you brought these students from, 25 students from 12 different schools across the country. And then your job is to figure out how to bring them together and have them all learn essentially in one environment for a number of months together in Israel with people they haven't met, without their parents, without their homes. I'm guessing that was, I'll call it, an interesting challenge. Tell us about how that went.
Right. So I guess I didn't fully answer your question. I guess the last question about how I got involved. So I made Aliyah 2 years ago. I moved to Israel from Cleveland. I had been in Cleveland for 11 years. It was amazing. We loved it there. After you hired me to teach Judaic studies there back in 2013, and then I was teaching. I was doing a number of different things in Israel, and one of the things that I was doing was teaching English at Yeshivat Neve Shmuel, a boys' high school in Efrat. And so that was when I got tapped. David Magerman had approached Or Torah Stone, Rabbi Kenny Brander, who's the president of Or Torah Stone, and approached them to try to come up with, run this program from, the Or Torah Stone high schools in Israel. And then I had a relationship with Rabbi Brander from back when I worked for him in YU. And so then I got involved. And so it was this like, at first, like, wow, this is such a cool opportunity. And then as I started kind of like thinking about what the details of what this would be like, it became like somewhat almost terrifying. It was like, wow, there are a million parts, right? Like, how do we figure out, we're taking kids in the middle of 10th grade. So we need to make sure that as much as our goal is for them to, like I said, learn where they belong and to really feel that connection and experience Israel and go on trips and hikes and see Israel and connect with the people and learn about the history and connect with the land and all that stuff, we also have to make sure that, okay, they're finishing 10th grade chemistry and history and math and etc. So how do we make sure to do that? And also they have to live and they have to eat and they have to, have there were about 20 Shabbatot. So like, how do we do all that? Right. So we had to figure out, all those different parts. So basically, yeah, it was like, we were building a school. It was a small school. It was only a semester and it was only 10th grade and there was only 25 kids, but we were basically building a small school, with, number of different curricula, like most kids, like I mentioned, chemistry, like most kids are taking chemistry, some kids are taking biology. So we had to figure out all those parts, and having kids come, join in the middle of the semester was a challenge to make sure that, we did the best we could to make sure that they are fulfilling the requirements that they need academically. Fortunately, in that regard, we did not, reinvent the wheel. There are other programs that do that. There's Alexander Muss and there's Tichon Ramah Yerushalayim, were programs who the people who run those programs have been super helpful for me and generous with their time, just kind of like answering questions that I have, like, well, how do you do this and how do you do that? So our model is unique in the sense that it's a religious Zionist program. It's an Orthodox program. And number two, we're rooted in schools. So those programs are kind of standalone programs where they have kids that come in and they have, their own campus, entirely to themselves, and they kind of run their program. So part of our goal, again, that learning where you belong piece, is that our students, we want them spending as much time as possible with Israeli students in the Or Torah Stone schools. So they're eating in the cafeteria together and they're spending many Shabbatot together. And as whenever we can, we have them even in classes together with the Israeli students. So whether it's, a Talmud class or, a Jewish thought class or things like that, some Beit Midrash informal learning, the yearly trip that the schools went on. The boys went to a 3-day hike in the south in Israel, and the girls went on a 3-day hike up north. And so our students participated in that with them. So those are all just like lots and lots and lots of different pieces that had to come together. And of course, finding the students that, in what, the spring of 2025, when we're looking towards the spring of 2026, that when we first started, starting with, is anyone going to be crazy enough to come? Are any, students going to be crazy enough to come to this program that hasn't happened yet? Are any parents going to be crazy enough to send their students? And thank God we had really amazing students. Like I said, we had applicants and we had to turn kids away, and we had really, really supportive parents who were, I thank them many times for trusting us with their most prized children. And but thank God it worked out, and so we're able to pull it off.
That's amazing. And so talk to us a little bit about, like, what did you learn from this, right? Because a lot of the people listening are principals, heads of school in your typical day school somewhere around North America. And you've had a slightly different experience. Yes, you've built this kind of mini school from scratch, smaller, fewer kids, but 24/7 in a sense that you're responsible for these kids at a pretty young age. And this new social group that came together. What are some of the lessons and some of the insights that you took from this first year of the program?
Yeah. It's, thank God we're now on this side of the first year, and like can look back and say, like, there's so many things that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out. And then like when the year happened, I was like, wow, like that wasn't necessary, but I wish I had spent more time thinking through like certain other things, and like I have last year's schedule, and now I could look back and like I'm so much wiser, this year than I was a year ago. I think the most important lesson that I learned was to be clear about expectations and to really clarify, this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do, and if that speaks to you, then join us. And if it doesn't speak to you, then that's okay. And just to be really clear with all the stakeholders, with parents, students, schools, and our teachers as well. We had to teach American chemistry and American history, all that kind of stuff. So we had teachers that mainly were immigrants to Israel, Olim, who had taught for a number of years in America, some for many years in America, and were passionate about their role as educators and, getting them, so grateful to have the staff, the faculty that we had. And to be clear to them also, what our expectations are and we're not a typical school. And sometimes that was a challenge, right? So, there are always going to be tensions between different goals, different values. So we had opportunities, let's say, for the girls to join the Israeli girls on a trip to before Yom HaZikaron, before the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers, to go to Har Herzl, Israel's military cemetery, right? And to go on a trip with them, right? So here we have a tension, right? It was a typical day of class. It wasn't our like regular trip day, which every Tuesday we went on trips. So, and we only got the message. It was originally canceled because there was a war. I don't know if you knew there was a war in Israel this year.
I noticed.
So that's a whole nother, we could do a whole episode on just like on what that was like. That was pretty wild times. But so a lot of things have to get rescheduled, things like that. So I get a message, a couple, on Friday that on Sunday we're going, from the school. On Friday, they messaged me. On Sunday, we're going to take we're rescheduling the trip. We're taking the girls to Mount Herzl. So of course that's why you're here, right? You're coming to a semester in Israel. Of course, we're going to send the girls to Har Herzl. Now, they also had, ground to cover in math and in science, and we had to cancel classes, right? And things like that come up. And so to be able to say like, look, when we have a conflict like that, we're going to choose going on that trip, right? Now, it's not because I don't think that class is important. I think class is super important. And I feel bad, frustrating the teachers and things like that. But that's who we are, right? That's like, so when there's a fundraiser flash mob in Jerusalem with the boys, also communication, maybe a little bit last minute, and they're also going to miss classes, right? And they're fundraising before the holiday of Purim, and they're fundraising to, help raise money for boys to make a bar mitzvah for boys with special needs or families that have children with special needs, right? That's an opportunity that I'm not going to pass up, but it creates tension, right? So to be able to say like, look, this is who we are. I remember, if you'll indulge me for a minute,
Go for it.
When I was in Cleveland, towards I think it was like towards the end of when you were there. So there was like a movement of, I think it had to do with, other schools in the neighborhood, like closing, things like that. But there was a bunch of students that came from a more right-wing, like yeshiva type a school to the Fuchs Mizrahi High School. And I taught those boys for a number of years. I was very close with them. I had a great relationship with them. But there were a number of times that we had these conversations where they would express frustration about certain things that we were doing. Like they would say like, certain of the Zionist, philosophies about our school, or the centrality of Zionism in our school. And some of the teachers that we would quote, like, you're always quoting Rav Soloveitchik, you're always quoting Nechama Leibowitz. Like, why do you guys do that? So I said to them, guys, it's like you're coming to a pizza store and you're ordering a hamburger, and then you're getting frustrated when they tell you, we don't sell hamburgers, this is a pizza store. It's like, you came to the pizza store. Like, look at the school. There's this giant, Israeli flag waving next to the American flag, waving in the front of the school. This is who we are, right? It's all over our literature. This is who we are. So if you're going to come to me and you're going to come to a pizza store and you're going to say, listen, I think you don't have enough cheese, or I think your sauce is bad. So let's talk about that, right? If you're going to tell me your Hebrew language instruction is not strong enough, you're going to tell me that, there's not enough time spent on doing this or that, things that is our mission. Fine, I'm all for that conversation. But if you're going to come here, you're going to say things like, you're not, my kid wants to get into Yale and you're not getting my kid into Yale. Well, I never promised to get a kid into Yale, right? So that's those are things like APs, for example. This year we learned, like, we had a number of students taking APs. It's possible. There are AP testing centers in Israel, so it works. The problem is that APs are really intense, and if students, and they were able to do it, and some of our students did really, really well in the APs, but they were also missing trips and missing parts of the program. So like, that's a tension. And that's something that, in our first year, we kind of tried to promise to be everything to everyone. And now I'm more confident to be able to say, listen, I don't recommend trying to do everything, because inevitably then something's got to give, right? So being clear about it was really, really, really important.
I love that point, and to me, it's fascinating because I'm often doing strategic plans with schools, and one of the key things in any strategic plan we always say is the hardest thing is not deciding what you're going to do. The hardest thing is deciding what you're not going to do, right? And making that choice and being able to say, we are X, we're not Y. And if we try and be X and Y, we're going to be nothing and frustrate everyone. So it's something we deal with in a lot of schools, often schools that are in competitive markets. And we're trying to say to these schools, be clear about who you are, be clear about your unique value proposition. What do you offer? And I would have thought, well, okay, Nelech, like there's not so many programs like this. So you're not really competing. You don't have that pressure, but you're still saying fundamentally, if you're not crystal clear to who you are to all of your stakeholders, you're going to run into problems across the board. And I think that's actually true about just about every school that I've worked with.
Right. Yeah, Jim Collins in good, I think it's in Good to Great. He has a great line where he says, "The fact that something's a once in a lifetime opportunity is a fact. It's not a reason to do something." Right. So like you get like really enticing, opportunities, and you have to say like, no, I'm saying no to that because it's just not, it's not, it doesn't serve our mission, and it's really hard. But like you said, if I need the kids that come and the parents that we're working with and the schools that we're partnering with and the teachers that are teaching our students, everyone needs to know what, because people are going to be frustrated otherwise if you're not clear. So it's not just about
Right.
competition. It's also just about, we want to make sure that we have the right people and, moving in the same direction, because otherwise it's just going to be, at least frustrating. And if not more, just people undermining what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. Absolutely. And you said people. I want to learn a little bit about the social dynamic, right? I'm fascinating, right? 25 kids from schools across the country, plop them together for a few months, totally out of their home environments. And this is not a summer trip where it's just a lot of fun for a number of weeks. This is like you said, it's school, it's work. I'm sure there was adjustment challenges for everybody. What did you see and learn about all of the social dynamic pieces?
Yeah. First of all, we were blown away by how quickly the group of like the 12 boys and the 13 girls, how quickly they meshed and how really minimal the like social tensions that we had, which like easily could have happened with kids living together from all kinds of different places. So that was a real blessing. And I don't take credit for that, but that was just like very, very fortunate. And then there was the piece of, connecting with the Israeli students also. I'll say another thing that, a lot of my learning as an educator, and my background in psychology also like really helps me appreciate the importance of that. I don't know if you've interviewed anyone connected with Lifnai V'Lifnim. Have you done any with the
We
Aguda
have
chat?
not, but that is a good one. We are going to add that to the list for a future
You gotta
episode.
get it.
Credit to Rick Schindelheim for that episode.
I recommend reaching out. So I worked for, sorry, I won't go into too much detail about it, but a lot of the emphasis of that organization of Lift Not Lift is about building relationships between teacher and student and student and student, and the importance of that the importance of belonging. And that I think is also universal, whether you're a semester program in, abroad, or you're a full, K to 12 school, in terms of obviously the students, but also the faculty and the staff, and, between students and teachers. I think the centrality of belonging is, it doesn't matter where you are. It's so important, right? Because if a kid feels like, and it's a lot of the work that I do also in camp, I work in Camp Stone in the summer, and the importance of that is huge to my, just the ability to kind of like learn together, like, even it sounds like it's kind of technical, but even like taking time during the week to have everyone sit in a circle and process together, learning together, reflecting on what we've done, what was the, this week like, and, what's challenging for everyone, getting to the students to speak to each other, I think is really, really valuable. Like speak directly to each other rather than kind of like, we like that, broad generic speaking, but actually, talking directly and like kind of encouraging them to do that. We went on a trip to the Gaza envelope, which was very, very powerful. And the ability to kind of like the next day, after they had a little bit of time to digest, to sit down and to kind of like reflect on that together was also really, really powerful. And so like having those tools as in my, my toolkit from years of teaching and running these kinds of groups was really, really important. And then,
And I
also,
imagine with those tools that it's actually, you mentioned Leaf Dive, Leaf Neem, so just the 10-second version, right? As Rick said, it's about building relationships between teachers, students, among students, and really, some really beautiful protocols for how to process and build those relationships. But in a typical school, you see the importance of that. You do it. There are many, many schools who are involved in that program across North America right now. But it sounds like you almost had you saw the need for it in a different way because you were bringing together a new group. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, well, if we could all apply that same need or that same impetus of, hey, we have to bring this group together within existing schools, there'll be a tremendous power in that as well.
Yeah. So one of the initiatives that we did, and we applied it, we did it in Cleveland in Fuchs Mizrahi, and then it's really grown to many, many other schools in the country. Really, also actually in the world, there's schools I know of in Australia and in England also that do this. So we have a period a week. It's called different things in different schools. In Cleveland, we called it Lev HaShavua, the heart. It's like a play on words, but I mean like the heart of the week, basically. And having that built in. So we did that one period for the girls. That was run by Amy Stein, the head of the girls program, and I did the boys program. And so the boys Lev HaShavua, just having that built in, meaning it wasn't like haphazard, like, okay, let's take a couple minutes now and let's do that. Because if it's not built in, like a lot of things, I'm sure a lot of school leaders can relate to this, that, if you don't have it built into the structure of the schedule, it's much less likely to happen, right? So we had a period built in every single week that allowed us to have that built-in reflection and connection time, which was really, really powerful and really important for us to have that, and allowed us to process all kinds of different things. And like, for example, when the boys were having a hard time, especially early on, the schedule in our school was much longer. It was a longer day than what most of them were used to. And there were a lot of challenges, and like the dorm life, right? So like you don't go home and you have your own room where you could sit down and you just sit at your desk or your dining room table, whatever. You're sharing a room with 3 other boys, and it's a lot of fun, and you're basically on like a Shabbaton every night. So you're like, they're going to sleep late and they're hanging out and having a good time. And it's like, okay, but there's also schoolwork, and so like, how do we manage that? And so that was also a space for us to kind of process these kinds of challenges that, had academic ramifications and social ramifications and the ramifications about the experience overall. But again, having that period built in for us to do that and to help them, like, who relates to, who here is having a similar experience. And though they're hanging out together all the time, it allowed them to kind of, connect and say, wow, like, that's very validating. Hearing that he's struggling with that too, that was helpful for me. And they could, kind of connect and work together and problem solving, but also just feeling like, okay, seen, I'm known, I share that experience with someone else.
Right. It does seem like 15-year-old boys might need a little bit of a prompt to be able to like reflect with each other about their feelings. That was probably a useful tool for them.
Yeah, a lot of the social pieces happen more naturally for the girls, both in terms of with each other and with the Israeli girls. So we had, for example, Shabbatot, right? Like I mentioned, there were 20 Shabbatot that they were together. So we had Shabbatot where you go to your cousins in, Beit Shemesh or something like that, in your grandmother in Jerusalem. But so that was some. And then we had, our own programs that we ran. And then another thing that was very important for us is to have opportunities where the students they're like kind of semi-structured, where we're not running the program, but they are going to the homes of friends that they made in school. Or maybe they're making these friends through the Shabbat, right? So for another, the girls very naturally, even though the girls' school wasn't a dorm school, so the girls' dorm was actually separate from the school. The girls, in a certain sense, it was more natural for them that they made these connections. They were, invited for Shabbat, without us, minimal or no prompting from us. And with the boys, we kind of had to work a little bit harder. Again, 10th grade boys, holding their hands a little bit and guiding them to make those connections. Even again, they're eating 3 meals a day in the cafeteria, whereas the girls just really had breakfast and lunch and not dinner in the school. And still the girls managed to like very naturally connect, and the boys needed a little bit more guidance, a little bit more prompting, like you said.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, as you reflect back after this first year, is there anything that surprised you? You're expecting A, and then something entirely different happened that you're taking with you?
That's such a good question. It's hard to know, right? It's hard to remember what like I didn't know before. I think, first of all, it's Okay, so the war, right? Was that surprising or not? Right, hard to know.
Yeah, well,
A little
wars
bit
with Iran
surprising,
right now are kind of routine. I don't even know if we
right?
can
At this
call that
point, right?
surprising anymore.
Right. Someone was like, "Oh, we never could have predicted that, that there's going to be a war." But on the other hand, it's like, unfortunately, maybe we should have. I'm very grateful. Actually, I had our like one of our dorm counselors, who was also like our logistics the guy. He said to me like a month before the program, he was like, He's like, we need a plan for if there's a snowstorm or he said, if there's a snowstorm or a missile attack from Iran, we need to have like emergency contacts set up and everything like that. He's like, because if there's a snowstorm and they close down school and there's no like cafeteria, then like we're in trouble. So we got to figure that out. And I was like, it's insane that, which is more likely that there's going to be a snowstorm or a missile attack. So in Cleveland, we know the answer. In Israel, the answer is the other way. So, but yeah, maybe that wasn't even that surprising, unfortunately. I think that how quickly the students became independent, I think, and how much they needed downtime. I was very concerned. Like one of the things I mentioned before, like spending a lot of time in the lead up of the program. And I mentioned Amy's time. So she and I like spent so much time trying to think of like, okay, school's over at this time and like curfew is at this time. So like, what are we having them do from this time to this time? Like they're kids. We need to fill the time. We need to make sure that they're not getting into trouble. And like for the boys, like I really was fine, like stretching out the day. There's like this interesting thing in Israel, which no American school that I'm familiar with schedules things like this, where they have like 10 to 15-minute breaks between like most classes, and it really stretches out the day. Whereas like in America, and I think Israelis, when they come to America, they're like, this is crazy. You only have like 2 minutes between classes. Like, why are you like in such a rush? But what it does is like, it really shortens the day, when you have compared to these like 10 to 15-minute breaks, especially for the boys, when they can go back to the dorm. So they're like, oh, I have 10 minutes. If you're, if you're a 15-year-old boy, 16-year-old boy, there's a lot that you think you can accomplish in 15 minutes, right? So like, I can do my laundry, I can make eggs, I can take a nap, and then I'll get back to class on time, right? So that obviously doesn't happen. But by the way, those things, like the fact that they were like cooking for themselves, which we provided meals, but they didn't always love the meals, but they were like, some of these boys were cooking a lot more for them, like going to the supermarket, making food, doing their laundry, which a lot of them have never done before. So the independence and how quickly they became independent, traveling on public transportation, always with parent permission, but doing that, like that was a surprise. And just also like how much they needed downtime, which I think was a challenge going in thinking they didn't need as much and they needed more structure. So how much downtime they really needed just to like, chill out, and how I think good and mature and responsible they were with that downtime for the most part were both things that was surprising to me. It was kind of like give them that independence, and they really rose to the occasion. And so like that's a takeaway for me for next year, is like thinking about like shortening those breaks during the day so that the boys' day doesn't end so late, because it really was like it was very long. And I think like giving them that time at the end of the day would have been helpful.
Right. And I love that point about the kids rising to the occasion. I know it's something that we think about a lot, educating within, a typical community day school, where we often feel that kids aren't necessarily given or taking that level of independence, and there's a certain maturity and tremendous benefit to it. And what strikes me from all of this, and we're going to wrap up in a moment, but what strikes me from all of this is this program forced you as an educator to think very holistically about the kids' development. And when we're often thinking about schools, we are thinking about social development, emotional development, spiritual development, all of those. But there's so much of our effort that goes into the academics and the classroom side of it that we don't necessarily spend as much time. And it sounds like this program really brought that out for you. And I would imagine that there's people listening who would either like to learn about the program because it might be relevant for one of their children or students, or just like to learn more about what this was like. Is there a good place that they can reach you? Well, how can they find you or the Nelech program?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nelech is spelled Nelech, Nelech at ots.org.il. So that's for Or Torah Stone. So don't forget the IL, ots.org.il.
Okay. We will put that in the show notes because that is a long web address.
Well, Nelech, that's right. So a couple of us monitor the email address, but if you send anything to Nelech, I will see it. I will get it. So, and I'll be happy to follow up.
Amazing. So Rick, thank you so much. It was really awesome to hear about this experience. We don't often get to hear about what a program was like the first year, and it sounds like it was fascinating. And it sounds like it was a really thoughtfully built program. And, as an educator and a parent, I'm always thinking about we want the leadership of programs, particularly programs away from home, to be particularly thoughtful and caring. And it very much sounds like you brought that. And I think it generated a lot of interesting questions, even for people who are running regular schools. So if you're out there listening, think about what it might mean to take a holistic view, push yourself to be slightly more holistic in the educational program you're thinking about for your own students, whether that's thinking about processing like the Lev HaShavua piece, whether it's thinking about independence. And in many cases, when we experiment with that sort of thing, we do see kids rise to the occasion. So like I always say, try it out and let me know how it goes. You can reach me as always at Barry Kislowitz on LinkedIn, Leadership Lenses on Substack, or on our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.